Forensics and the Failure of Flood Control by Richard Jonathan O. Taduran, Ph.D. When floodwaters rise, they do more than displace lives. They expose truths that have been buried in concrete, contracts, and silence. In his 2025 State of the Nation address, President Marcos vowed to uncover the corruption behind anomalous flood control projects after torrential rains killed dozens and displaced over 200,000 Filipinos. "Mahiya naman kayo," he said bluntly, addressing those responsible for siphoning funds meant to protect communities from disaster. He didn't stop at rhetoric. Marcos called for a complete list of all flood control projects from the past 3 years to be made public, published for Filipinos to see, scrutinize, and demand answers. The challenge, it seems, is not just technical, but moral. How did projects designed to prevent catastrophe become complicit in it? Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson has raised alarm that nearly 1 trillion pesos, half of the almost 2 trillion pesos allocated to flood control under DPWH since 2011, may already have been lost to corruption. That's public money meant to protect lives, disappeared or diverted into private hands. Corruption in infrastructure isn't a new story in the Philippines, but when it collides with climate reality, the consequences become deadlier and harder to ignore. Drainage systems that don't drain, dikes that collapse under pressure, pump stations that were never fully built or never really meant to work. These are not random failures. They are the physical evidence of institutional decay. Compounding the urgency, recent floods have prompted some 80 towns and cities, mostly in Luzon, as well as entire provinces like Pampanga and cities like Valenzuela, Malabon, and municipalities in Bulacan, Pangasinan, Batangas, and Cebu to declare states of calamity. These declarations enable rapid funding and price controls, but they also signal deeper structural failure that should have been prevented, not reacted to. Built to fail. When we hear forensics, we often think of fingerprints, blood spatter, or skeletal remains. But the forensic mindset, the disciplined, evidence-based analysis of cause and consequence, extends far beyond the crime scene. It applies equally to broken levees, collapsed embankments, and the silent math of diverted budgets. Consider forensic engineering, a field dedicated to understanding how and why structures fail. In the aftermath of disaster, forensic engineers can determine whether substandard materials were used, whether flood control designs met hydrological needs, and whether timelines and safety tests were manipulated. Their findings don't just point to cracks in concrete, they point to cracks in accountability. Pair that with forensic accounting, which traces the money. Were contractors overpaid? Were materials overpriced? Did budget allocations match what was actually built on the ground? The signatures on those receipts may lead us to the same place as the collapsed infrastructure: intent, negligence, or outright fraud. There's also a growing role for environmental forensics and geospatial analysis. Satellite imagery, LiDAR scans, and flood mapping can now reveal discrepancies between project blueprints and actual implementation. In other words, the land doesn't lie, and in a country where records may vanish, the terrain still testifies. When trust erodes. But beyond the technical, what's at stake here is public trust. When science and engineering are corrupted, the betrayal is profound. These are the disciplines we rely on for safety, for certainty, for survival. When they're bent to serve private gain, the damage ripples far beyond the flood zone. It erodes confidence in expertise. It teaches people that disaster preparedness is a myth, and that resilience is just another word for abandonment. Too often, public discourse celebrates Filipino resilience in the aftermath of catastrophe, how we cope, rebuild, smile through the mud. But resilience, while admirable on an individual level, should never become a substitute for accountability at the systemic level. When government officials, media, or development agencies cling to the language of resilience, they risk romanticizing survival while ignoring the policies and failures that made survival necessary in the first place. In this context, resilience becomes a distraction, one that masks chronic neglect and structural injustice. Accountability must go beyond naming a few bad actors. It must include understanding how systems fail, not just politically, but structurally. This is where forensic thinking offers a different kind of clarity. It doesn't just ask who signed the papers. It asks what failed, how, when, why, and could it have been prevented? In that light, perhaps it's time we rethink how we review disaster-related infrastructure, not with more layers of bureaucracy, but with more rigor. Could we be doing more to integrate the insights of engineers, scientists, and data analysts when assessing what went wrong? Might there be value in bringing forensic thinking, not just criminal investigation, but cause and effect analysis, into how we review public projects? What if post-disaster reviews routinely included not just financial audits, but structural assessments and environmental forensics? This isn't about assigning blame for its own sake. It's about learning from the evidence before it disappears beneath the next flood. Follow the failure. We must also recognize that the effects of these failures are not abstract. They hit hardest in barangays already struggling with poor housing, limited mobility, and weak disaster response. They deepen inequalities that science and governance should be working to close. When floodwaters come, they do not discriminate, but their consequences certainly do. As climate extremes intensify, we need infrastructure that does more than exist. We need infrastructure that works, survives, and protects. That means demanding more from our institutions, but also from our methods of investigation and oversight. Forensic science offers not just a toolkit, but a mindset, one that insists on evidence, on sequence, on truth. President Marcos' call for transparency is a start, but if we are to truly protect lives, we must go beyond transparency toward traceability, the ability to follow the chain of failure from blueprint to aftermath. That is the essence of forensic analysis, and that is what this moment demands. Because the next typhoon won't care who got the kickbacks, but we should.